All right, today we're going to talk about example 7 from section 9.4. It's a trig graphing section in our online textbook. And the example that we're going to look at says to graph the function f of x equals 2 cosine of x minus pi over 2 plus 1. Now the most important piece of this, first of all, to remember that now that we added all the pieces to our graphing, our general equation is a cosine b x minus c plus d, with each of these letters a, b, c, and d representing our amplitude, our number of cycles in a period, our phase shift, and our vertical shift. So knowing that what these letters mean and where they apply in the equation is super important. So to start graphing, I would not just grab a graph and start plotting right away. The first thing to do is to figure out these important pieces. What's the amplitude? What's the center? My vertical shift, my phase shift, my period, and my best scale. So let's get these written down before we go ahead and graph. The amplitude is that a in the general equation, that first number that pops up. So in this case, it's going to be a 2. And I'm going to do that in red for you. I'm going to skip center for now and go right to the vertical shift. My vertical shift is that letter D. So that's found at the end here. And that's going to tell me that I'm going up 1. The other letter that I know in this equation is C. And C is our phase shift. And that minus pi over 2 means that our graph shifted to the right pi over 2 units. Now that I have those letters that are seen in my equation down, let's fill in the rest. That's center, period, and best scale. Now the center of my graph changes with the different shifts that change. The thing that affects the center is my vertical shift. My vertical shift says take my graph and move it up or down. So if I'm taking the whole graph and moving it up 1, that means my center is moving from 0 up to 1. So our center here is 1. The period of my graph comes from knowing b. So my period is always 2 pi divided by b. And here, since I can't see a b in the equation, I know it's 1. So it's 2 pi over 1, or just simply 2 pi. The best scale is taking my period and cutting it in fourths. So period divided by 4 gives me a scale of pi over 2, which is a nice number to work with given that my shift is also pi over 2 units. It makes the math nicer for us. The other thing I like to fill in before I start graphing is my high point and my low point. The high point comes from knowing the amplitude and the center. So the amplitude is the distance from the center. So if my center is 1 and my amplitude is 2, the highest point I'm going to reach is 3. I'm going 2 units from 1. My low point means I'm going 2 units down from the center 1, which means it will be a negative 1. My center and my amplitude help work together to find those high and low points. Now that we have this information available and at our hands, let's start graphing. To begin my graph, I always fill in my center, my high, and my low point to start. So I know my center is at 1, and I'll mark that with a dotted line. My high point is going to be 3, since my amplitude is 2. And my low is negative 1, again, based off the amplitude being 2. Now, my best scale is pi over 2, and luckily since my shift is also at pi over 2, it's some nice math for us, and I can just write out pi over 2 for my units. Now I'm just going to show you one cycle here on this screencast, but if you'd like to look at more than one cycle, you can always open the example in the book, and it shows you a couple more than one. Now, to start, I'm going to show you all those shifts except for that phase shift. And I'm going to show you how that phase shift works in our graph. So ignoring the phase shift just for this moment, I'm going to graph a cosine graph with a vertical shift of 1 and the amplitude of 2. So I know that cosine starts at the high point, then goes to its center, down to its low, center, and back up high again. This blue is my graph without the phase shift. Now the last step here would be to add in that phase shift. And my phase shift, if we just go back to that last slide for a second, our phase shift says I'm going to the right pi over 2. So every point on my graph, of my one cycle that I just graphed, has to shift over pi over 2 units. So before, when I was at 0 to start, I'm shifting this point over pi over 2 units. This pi over 2 shifts over to pi. This low point on pi shifts over to 3 pi over 2. This center point at 3 pi over 2 shifts to 2 pi. And finally, that high point at 2 pi shifts to 5 pi over 2. Making my final graph in red here the final graph of that example.